War II medical equipment here?
This is World War II medical equipment, yes, sir.
Okay, so what are we looking at exactly?
All right, so let's see. So some of the stuff that we have here, um, typically the first thing that I'm going to grab is some arterial clamps because if somebody is bleeding, I want to be able to stop that right away.
Okay, which ones are the arterial clamps?
Yeah, that's all the stuff right
Okay,
here.
good.
So next thing, what happens is that if I'm looking at um, doing an amputation, I'm going to start that by, there's actually a knife underneath that saw there. There we go. I would cut away the tissue and the skin, and then use the big saw. If it's a big bone, use the small saw. If it's a small bone, and if it's in a place that's kind of rough to get to, for example, a shoulder bone or something like that, I would use this thing. So these are good for nice straight extremity cuts, but this is good for doing a cut somewhere closer into the body. The other thing that potentially I would use, speaking of cutting bone near the body, is this is a rib cutter.
A rib cutter.
Rib cutter for cutting ribs. Um, Next thing probably doing is like, let's say if I'm going after a bullet, a couple of the tools that I'm going to want would be a bullet probe, and once I find that bullet, I'll use one of these two large tools here for actually extracting the bullet. Now, if a patient's got an injury to the head, for example, that's bleeding under the skull or what's known as subdermal hematoma, I would use this little device here.
The trepanning tool?
And this is, right, this is a trephine tool. And this is used to cut into the head and be able to pull, be able to cut a hole in the head, a circular hole in the head to be able to pull out a piece of skull about the size of a dime, and that will allow the bleeding to come out. There's another saw that could be used for cutting into the skull, and that's this one. And what happens is that, let's pretend the curvature of this thing matches the curvature of the skull. I would cut down this way until I'm actually cut through the bone and then turn it sideways like this and keep cutting. And this would be actually cutting a square hole into the brain. Some other things, what happens is that if I have to put a tourniquet on to stop bleeding, here's a tourniquet. If I actually am working inside the body and I have to pull tissue away and muscle away, I have retracting tools. So this is a small retractor that can be used mostly for blood vessels. This is a large retractor that actually is for pulling abdomen out of the way to be able to go lower inside the body cavity. And then in addition, these are spreaders. And what happens is that if I cut somebody open, I want to be able to have the skin pulled away so I can work inside the body. And that's what these are for, a small one and a large one. And that's pretty much what we've got. We got some scissors for cutting bandages. Modern day, you have, for suturing, you have the needles already attached to the thread. They don't have that back in World War II. What they would do is they would have the thread, and this is a needle for doing suturing up. So they would suture up with this, and then do the next one, rather than having sutures attached to the needles. So a little bit different stuff going on back then.
So is there like an eye in that needle, or how does it work?
Yeah, there's a hole there.
Oh, okay.
There's a hole there. You would run your thread through
that. Okay.
The next, oh great. Okay. Some of the other things that are different between now and World War II is that the IV bottles that you're seeing here in front of you are what they used back then. Everything was in glass. And right now, if you were to have IV solutions, blood, albumin, whatever, it would be in these plastic IV tubes as opposed to glass. During Vietnam is when they made the big switch because the stuff is less likely to break, easier to carry if it's in those plastic.
Yeah, it seems a glass bottle in a combat zone sounds rather fragile.
Correct. Well, keep in mind, supposedly we're, behind the lines here. So it's not as much of a concern for us.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Now, I know that during the Second World War, they had a lot of people making bandages, knitting bandages.
Right.
How useful was that actually?
Well, what happens is that you want to have your bandages be sterile. So the thing is that
Yeah, and I'm
if you
thinking
had
the lady's sewing circle doesn't seem the best way to get that to me.
correct, correct. So what happens is that the bandages that they are sewing, if there is a way to sterilize or partially sterilize that by having them steam pressurized steam cleaned, like which is what sterilization is, and then having them sterilely wrapped, that's fine. But really, one of the good things about it is that you can then get sterile gauze, which is professionally made, and then have the sterile gauze packing the wounds, and then take these handmade bandages and use that to hold the gauze in place. So there is that utility.
Okay, I've always kind of wondered about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, keep in mind that sterilization in germ theory has only been with us since about the 1870s. So a lot of the people you see in sewing circles making that stuff was pre that time period.
What I know, my local historical society in Kalida has unfinished bandages from the Second World War. Apparently, it was
Right.
still done fairly
And they were
wide sale.
handmade.
Yeah, they
Okay.
still have the knitting needle. It just seems
Okay. Well,
it
you would
just
want to.
didn't make a lot of sense to me,
Yeah. You would definitely want. Um, you would definitely want to have something sterile underneath those bandages
Okay.
before you apply those bandages.
Okay, so what do we have over here to our right?
Well, we have a variety of different things. We've got more dressings, more instruments. Um, some of the other stuff that we have here is that we have ether.
Is that the
Uh,
green bottle?
no. This is ether here.
Okay.
Ether and a mask for administering ether. What happens is that sometimes when you're giving ether, you want to also give oxygen with it. So this has actually got a little plug here that I can apply oxygen through the same mask. This also is an oxygen tank over here for giving oxygen. You would always want to have small tanks like that rather than the large tanks because obviously they're lighter um, and less risk of less damage should that tank puncture in some way. Uh, for terms of other painkillers, we have morphine that we can give either in morphine syringes like this. And typically, what happens is that if the morphine was given, one of the things that we would do is mark that on the patient's tag. We might put an M on their forehead using blood to indicate they'd already been given a morphine.
So is that what the soldiers would carry with them? I've heard
Yeah,
soldiers. Okay,
right.
so
In
that's
the small kits. I'm gonna go get some popcorn. So what happens is that there's a tiny kit about this big that basically is used to hold a compress, and that's all that is. That's just the bandage. And there's a larger kit that's about this big, and then the kit that's about this big holds the compresses as well as holding some of the morphine ampoules as well. But morphine can also be given in a standard injectable form using needles such as these.
so. What was the dosage of the small ampule?
Let's see. So they come in a box that looks like this, and this is what's known as a half a grain.
Half a grain.
Right here, got a question over here. Yeah.
Bo would like you to do the quilt presentation. We're running already late by the flag.
He wants me to. Does he want me to read something? He wants me to read something.
Well, I'll make something up.
All right.
Him or you? I can't.
Okay.
I can't do it looking like this.
Okay. I'll need to get one of my medics to kind of keep an eye on stuff over here. Then. Hey, Bob, do me a favor.
Thank
Find
you
me
for
a
talking to me, and